Ministry with young adults during a pandemic. None of us ever expected that. I mean, maybe we watched movies about these kinds of things possibly happening. We heard that it might be a possibility, but it just seemed so far away. I remember being in California back in late February at a meeting and flew back and then was doing a session live with some people in early March. And then the next thing I knew, everything was shut down. And for example, the collegiate ministry that I was doing had to suddenly go online, and the groups I was working with and the people that I knew and prayer online and various things that were happening, the entirety of any work that was engaged in. And yet it became a time of introspection as well. A time, yes, of maybe a bit of isolation, maybe more than a bit. And also, it's been a time that's in which there's been distancing, things like simple things like coffee with somebody or a meal or so forth. And during the summertime, it seemed like, okay, this is lessening. Maybe we can go back to things, but we know that's changed. And the agonizing that people are doing over holiday celebrations and various things that are happening, and even more so, people in ministry, those of us in ministry. There are many people, lay ecclesial ministers, who maybe have lost their jobs, have had to try to find positions, or some who have become very territorial because they're afraid of just that, losing their livelihood, their health care in the midst of a pandemic. And then, of course, there's all the other things that are happening within society, within the church, challenging things, racism and the sin of racism that needs to be eradicated, the cause of racial justice that rises up and has arisen and calls us to more. The political situation, division and polarization. The ecclesial situation, in which we see at times again the failure of leaders to protect minors and the vulnerable. All of these things weigh on us as people in ministry. And so, how do we accompany one another? I think that's one of the things that sometimes, because we're so outwardly focused in ministry, we don't take a moment to stop and to focus on how are we accompanying one another. And then from there, how do we accompany others? Because if we are not, it's like that, for example, many times in working with people who are doing caregiving of an elderly relative, how many times does it happen that the caregiver gets sick because the caregiver has not cared for themselves? Now, some people see a certain degree of self-care as narcissistic. Instead, it's meant to bolster us spiritually, emotionally, physically, to be able to go forth and accompany others. And our accompaniment needs to be intentional. It was a lot easier to throw an event, and we all know that we're trying to move more toward an accompaniment model and away from an event-based model. And there are other presentations during the forum that talk about this. But in this time, let's take a moment to look at what are we talking about when we talk about accompaniment. Much of what I'm going to be talking about is from this book, The Art of Accompaniment. It's a Catholic Apostolate Center resource. written by two young adults who have an expertise in faith formation, Colleen Campbell and Tom Karani. And if we look in the art of accompaniment, we see a definition of accompaniment, a couple definitions. They say accompaniment is a broad term that refers to a relationship between two or more people who share mutually and reciprocally in the spiritual life. In other words, they say, one who accompanies is a steadfast spiritual friend, ready to support, encourage, and listen to the other in all circumstances. And we'll get back to that in a moment. In another point, they give another definition that I think speaks particularly to the Christocentric dimension of spiritual accompaniment. Spiritual accompaniment is the apostolate of intentional relationship that is oriented toward a definitive direction of growth in holiness and transformation in the person of Christ. Accompaniment is not about meandering. Accompaniment has a definitive direction, Christ. Pope Francis is very clear about this. It's meant to deepen our encounter with Christ. Where is it that we are going? We're not just going in directions that are meant to meander, but instead directions that are meant to deepen our life in holiness, life in Christ, in and through his church, because that is the Catholic dimension. It's always done in and through his church. So when we're sent forth, and because it's an apostolate, we're sent forth as apostles, as missionary disciples, not just simply as pastoral ministers, but all are called to accompany others. And this is where I think in this pandemic, we have an opportunity to build even further ways and means of accompaniment. For example, notice what Campbell and Karani say. A steadfast spiritual friend, the one who accompanies, ready to support, encourage, and listen to the other in all circumstances. Now, none of us as pastoral ministers have the time, or really should we have the time to try and be all things to all people. But we can assist others, especially leaders, the people that we work closely with, to help them learn how to encourage, support, and listen to the other in all circumstances, to walk with the other. And I think in this time of pandemic, it is one of the ways in which we can go about our ministry with young adults. We can provide formation and skills and practical tips, if you will, to be able to do just that, to listen, to encourage, to support in all circumstances. We know from the various studies that we've seen recently over these last several months, that one of the most isolated communities that are experiencing some of the highest degrees of loneliness are young people. And sadly, and this is across the board in religious communities, particularly in Christianity, there's been rather poor outreach. That's not an indictment. That's a call. It's a call for us to do more. And the do more is not just simply having another Zoom meeting. The do more is to walk with the other person and walk with those who are leaders and help them then form others, to assist them in forming others, so that then they can also go forth. It means compassionate and patient listening. My colleague Brian Rood talks more about that in his presentation. It means being present when somebody we may find it difficult, maybe even tedious to listen, but we need to encourage in this time. And it's not false encouragement. And nor is it that we have a public stance that somehow we've got it all together. But instead, how do we show the other person that we are on the journey as well? That we also are walking along. And who's walking with us? Christ. About a month ago, I was invited to facilitate a gathering, online gathering of members of the NatYam team, as well as those who have been involved in the National Institute for Young Adult Ministry. It was meant to be just simply an opportunity for people to talk about where they are. I invite you to just consider a couple of questions, 3 different ones, of a moment of reflection in between each. And then we'll talk about ways forward. How is this time for you as a leader and minister to others? For many, it's a challenging time. It's a time where people are concerned about maybe their jobs, their families, their health, their financial situation, their situations of ministry and difficulties that they might be having. And the call is for deeper prayer and commitment to one another and commitment to those that we are called to serve. How about ministering with others? What is your experience of ministering with others currently, your colleagues, those that you work together with in ministry? What's that experience like right now? Ministering with others currently sometimes is very much a challenge. There's distance. People might be in an office, but it might be 1 or 2. It's not the whole complement of a staff team. It's not necessarily something that we can do because we're used to maybe working together and coming up with ideas and developing programs together, and maybe we have a fatigue of doing that on online ways. Maybe there's tension. Maybe people have shut down, including people who might be our leaders. Maybe they feel overwhelmed. Maybe some have taken to addictive behavior. We're doing things that do damage. And maybe we feel distant. Again, we're called to accompany and walk with our colleagues, to listen particularly, to encourage and support. And we might say, well, I don't know if I have the ability to do that. Is there at least one other we can be present to? And how are you personally? Consider that. Not just the basic, how are you? Oh, fine. But how are you really? What's going on? What's happening with you? Take a moment to reflect on that. As this pandemic has stretched on, it's becoming harder and harder on everyone. We try to present a good game face in the midst of these things. But there are moments of challenge, of difficulty, and of isolation. There are moments of tension. There are moments of sorrow, suffering, sickness, death. There are moments in which we say, what can I do about what's happening in society or within the church? And it may all seem just simply overwhelming. The call is to find that a trusted person to walk with us. And also to trust in Christ. What's our way forward? I'd like to offer you what the group that gathered and we walked through these different questions and shared with one another what they came to. In one instance, it might seem very, very basic, but it's extremely important. Trust God. Do what God asks of you. That means stopping ourselves and listening and assisting others, accompanying others in how to do that. Help them to trust God, and we will build each other's trust in the process. And how to discern, teaching others how to discern, what's God asking of me at this time? And then also to see where God speaks to us in unexpected and unlikely ways. St. Vincent Pallotti, the founder of my community, took some things from various Catholic spiritualities and put together in a simple set of sentences just what this is talking about. Seek God and you will find God. Seek God in all things and you will find God in all things. Seek God always and you will find God always. Do we see just the negative? Or do we recognize that this can be a time of hope and abundance and fruitfulness, different from what we've done before? But maybe God is speaking to us. In fact, I believe God is speaking to us in all sorts of unexpected and unlikely ways. And then to find communities or build communities of support and trust. There are times where people are checking what they're saying because they're not sure how it will be received. Who are those communities of support and trust? And then in pastoral ministry, how do we build those for young adults? What are the ways in which we create or that we sustain these communities of support and trust? I've seen them sustain, yes, in online meetings and in different ways, but particularly the one-on-one, the accompaniment, the listening, the encouragement, the support, and then diffusing that out to the group so that then a community can be built even more fully over time. None of this is easy. And I am not going to say that it is. I admire your ability to continue to minister with young adults during this time. God bless you in all that you do. And know that my prayers and those of the team that I work with are with you. May the charity of Christ urge us on.